All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and call this to order. Thank you, everyone, for joining us online as well as in person. I don't have the normal set of slides. We're kind of doing a new setup tonight. So you'll notice when we do the recording, publish the recording later, it'll be a little bit different. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. But also we have a really informative program tonight with Dr. Wang, who's going to talk to us about regulating AI systems. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Wang. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the introduction. It is really a pleasure for me to be here tonight to share with you the last 2 years of my professional work. When I was at Microsoft, this is totally new to me. I'm actually a software design engineer and architect. So going into this regulatory and legal stuff on AI is totally new to me. And so I hope that you can enjoy the content, which is totally different perspective from the traditional AI system as we engineers know it. Typically, if you wanted to describe what AI is to a new student or to new employee, in one equation, it will be this one based on decision theory. It is just a fancy way of saying that what typical AI system is doing is given an input X, you want to generate output Y, such that certain utility function U of X, Y is optimized. Give you an example. Let's say you're running a recommender system, like a shopping site. You want to entice your customers to click on recommended merchandise. Your utility function would be revenue, add revenue, or whatever. And therefore, the utility function is how you can actually entice your users to click on whatever you put in front of them. Right? And so you can actually collect all of the data, X, Y, look at what past history, X, Y, and train a machine learning model, P of Y given X, to see how you can maximize it. And so the industry jargon, P of Y given X, is the so-called direct model because you're taking the input-output training exemplars and ask the machine to brute force, learn what is the right thing to score every X-Y pair and come up with the most optimized outcome. And as computing facilities getting more and more powerful, it turns out that we can actually plug in a Bayes theorem, a mathematical theorem, and rewrite this equation into the bottom one, which involves two statistical models. The first one, P of Y given X, typically is called the likelihood model, and the P of Y is the prior, how likely a particular outcome should be. And that is the area. And in recent years, we know that the AI, if you're just taking the X, Y, you cannot you cannot enumerate all the possible inputs and output in the world. When you deploy the AI system into the field, you are going to run into some mismatch. And some of the mismatch can incur horrible outcomes, such as biases. You will actually you will give a low critical scoring, for example, to certain demographic group, and that is not right. That's wrong. So you're probably starting to see a lot of ACM conferences, like recommender systems or KDD, start having sessions talking about how we can actually unbias the system, or how do we actually realize so-called ethical AI to make the system fair. But this is what the computer scientists usually talk through each other. It is not very congruent to the society, to the legislature, to the society at large. And in fact, for the majority period of my career, I've been using this and approving budgets and approving projects. And it turns out that if we keep teaching our students and new employee with this equation alone, it's actually a quick way to get lawsuits. It's very appropriate that we actually talk about lawsuits in the law firms today. But this is just the recent thing, right? The largest one is this Facebook settlement in the order of 650 million. And when the feature rolled out, it's a feature, I don't know if you remember, is the Facebook would actually come and ask you about the one photo you uploaded to see if the faces that it recognizes are actually your friends. And they would say, yeah, this is this friend, that is that friend. To us, the computer scientists, this is a very clever feature. It gives Facebook a quick way to gather a lot of training data, X, Y, see the face, and you identify this as a person. And it's very cheap, and it's very reliable. And the utility is fantastic, because it now gives the website capability to help you. If you want to just search the photos you have uploaded 3 years ago about you and your particular friend, you can just search it. And because you already laid it before, and you help the facial recognition of Facebook better, and so the outcome is just going to be better. So for us, this is a fantastic feature. The outcome is a huge fine, right? And TikTok, Google Photos, Snap are all hit with the similar feature. Yesterday, this is a very new slide, Google Map, and the second largest one, 391 million settlement from 40 states. That is actually another one, a very interesting example that leave us, the AI creator, scratch our head. What should we deal with it? The scenario is that Google allow every user to turn off the location service. So you can tell Google, do not track my location. But when you actually type in a query, restaurant near me, what do you expect? From Google's point of view, of course, I want to show the most relevant results, so I want to show the restaurant near you physically. Guess what? That's actually a $392 million fine because you are not fulfilling the promise that you made to the system. So this is actually a big number, and now I start appreciating that Microsoft lawyers telling us that you should not do this 4 years ago, while we're pointing to Google, hey, how come they can do this? So as a result, Microsoft Search looked stupid. Where you say restaurant near me in Irvine, you get a result in Atlanta because last time you used it is in Atlanta whatsoever. But so this is actually a huge mismatch between what we think as the utility and what the rest of the world think as utility, right? And a lot of lawsuits are actually U.S. states law, so quite a few of them are from state of Illinois, and then you have 40 states of attorney generals gang up on Google. And they are even more aggressive players in the legislative process, and the lawsuits are still ongoing, to the extent that all these big tech say, enough, we cannot deal with it. It's very expensive. In the US, we have 54 jurisdictions, and if every jurisdiction comes up with their own laws and regulations, it's very expensive for any company or any AI system creator to actually keep track of. So in the last World Economic Forum before the pandemic, all the big tech companies are seeing the same chorus as summarized by this Wall Street Journal headline: please regulate us. In a way, what this development means is that all these big tech companies realize that we need to have one standard, hopefully one universal standard that can help us, that can guide us to create systems so that we don't get into legal trouble. And so one of the big, let me ask, how many of you know GDPR? The privacy, however, good. So, and so we know the most aggressive, or one of the very active regulator is European Union. So after this call is made, of course, the first out of the door is EU. it's the same group of people that gave us the GDPR, and it's published in April 2021, not just more than a year ago, and it's actually a group of politicians and maybe lawyers that came up with ideas how to actually regulate AI, and it's called AI Act proposal. The idea is that if you read the documents, it says that the AI creators or AI deployers should actually be able to classify the risk about the way they use AI. And there are certain unacceptable risk systems, such as computing social scoring or enable governments to do policing state stuff, that would be totally banned. It's actually written as such in the documentation. And for the rest of, in general, any AI systems that would try to manipulate human behavior or to circumvent individuals' free will would be regarded as unacceptable risk system and would be banned. Basically, when I talk to some of the legislators, they say basically everything China did in Xinjiang would be banned. That's the legislative objective. And the second layer is called high-risk system. And the way they define high risk is kind of weird. It's based on scenarios. So like transportation, you're doing self-driving car, or you are helping the navigation of the public transportation. Even the building elevators can be interpreted as transportation facility. Or education. If you're doing scoring automatically on students, that was classified as high risk. Employment. If your firm is using AI to screen resumes, that is high risk. Not to mention the financial services, credit scoring, insurance claim, healthcare using AI to appropriate healthcare services. These are all risk as high risk. And with high risk, they define a huge, very onerous obligation for system players to actually have to comply. And if not, you will get a GDPR-like of a penalty, which is very substantive. And of course, this proposal, once it was out, received many polite but very interesting responses. Let's put it this way. I just listed two of them from Google, Microsoft, and basically they are saying that this is not realistic. What do you mean by high risk? And especially the legislation did not classify whether the responsibilities and obligations fell on system creator or system user, the person that deployed the system, or the operating guy, the monitoring guy. They don't have anything. So one of the feedback is, can we actually define different actors and make the accountability more clear? And another problem is the risk definition. An AI system can be simultaneously high risk or low risk. For example, Google Assistant or Siri on your phone. If you are using it just to check the weather, that's not high risk, right? But if you take your phone into your vehicle and start asking Siri to help you navigate through the traffic, suddenly that falls into transportation. That's high risk. So as a system developer, how should I classify my little AI system as high risk or low risk? So these are actually very practical points that the legislation did not consider. The legislation proposal did not consider. And another very common critique about the draft is that, can you please not tell us what not to do, but give us some principles and guidelines as to what to do. So these are the both Microsoft and Google made this comment. There is a very fun article from Wire magazine in 2021 that saying the fight to define what AI is high risk, particularly on this subject. The subtitle is actually very funny. It's everyone from tech companies to your churches would like to have a say in this. So it just basically tells you that the proposal gained a lot of attention, but in the meantime is not have a lot to improve. Right. So other than EU, there are other jurisdictions that also have published documentation papers position papers on this. In United States, it came from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. It's very recent. It's from last month, and basically it's following this white paper is a so-called AI Bill of Rights. We have a Bill of Rights. We all know what Bill of Rights it is. What if when the AI gets more deeply ingrained into our daily lives, what kind of a Bill of Rights that we humans have? United Nations and G20 countries, they also have similar policy guidelines and papers. And if you read all of them, you find out that they are actually referring to this seminal work by an organization called OECD. So the majority of the rest of the talk, I'm going to cover the OECD work, which was published in May 2019, called OECD AI Principles. So very quickly, OECD is an organization that was created after World War II to administer the Marshall Plan to basically help the Europe to get back economic. And afterwards, it has evolved into organizations to facilitate economic cooperation and development. First, limited to Europe, but now it has expanded to Asia and South America, for example. And most famously, they are the organizer of G7 and G20 meetings. The G20 meeting is actually taking place in Indonesia right now. But they are also a very credible publishers and data publisher and policy guideline publisher. Just like ASEAN conference papers are very credible and prestigious publication for AI, for computer science research, right? So I was lucky to have the opportunity to be sent by Microsoft to participate in this effort. So I have some knowledge about this one, but as I told you that this is a very totally different work from the equation and software programming work. And I have to learn a totally different languages. So quickly, the OECD AI principles basically has this principle. As you remember, in response to the EU's AI Act proposal, a lot of people are asking, can you just tell us the principles? What are the principles we should abide by in designing our system and in monitoring our behavior? And here are the principles. This coming from OECD, which is the economic with a strong economic focus. It's not surprised. The number one is we want growth and development, but it has to be inclusive growth. You cannot have a system, you cannot have a policy that only the rich can afford it, for example. That will be not inclusive. And we want to have a sustainable development. So if you have to have a server farms running like a zillion watts of a GPU farms in order to do some certain thing. That's not sustainable unless you have a clean energy mitigation as well, right? So that's the first one. The second one is human-centered, and I didn't realize they meant it literally, as we will show later on. And fairness is just one of them. So most of us in developed AI systems for the past, in the recent decades, we think about fairness, we think about bias removal, but fairness is just one of the values, right? And the third one is transparency, and the hard one, explainability. A lot of machine learning, as you know, is very notorious for to understand why the system actually came up with the results. But we are going to, the goal here is to force the developers to be able to explain a system behavior or actually hold them accountable. And not to mention, of course, robust. You secure and safe. You don't want to have the hackers, foreign hackers, to hack into a system and mess up your, mess things up, right? All right, and so, and the OECD's effort is actually quite new. The government body of running the process actually was established in 2018 only. So less than roughly 4 years ago, following after 2 international conferences they call. So this is actually one of the OECD's charters. They facilitate meetings. They gather experts to have them exchange ideas and come up with proposals. And it was clear that in 2018, should be one of the chartered activities in OECD. So a body called IGO, which stands for AI governance, was created in OECD. And in a year, they actually did the research and came up with the 5 principles as a legal framework, as a policy framework, sorry, not legal, policy framework that they would use to advise governments around the world to form their legislation and make their policies. And that's the OECD AI principle in 2019. That was actually my first encounter with OECD at G20 Osaka, G20 meeting in Osaka. The press was all about Trump wanted Russia to get into a G7 and things like that. But behind the scene, there was actually serious discussion. So when the principle published, none of the press was actually reporting it, which is kind of a little bit disappointing to me. But it's actually a serious work. And so from there, right before the pandemic, the OECD network experts and AI observatory was launched. And that's actually a repository of data and policy papers on the website. And at that time, if we have time, I'll be more than happy to show you what's out there. It's to some of computer scientists, there are actually amazingly rich data sets out there that we can potentially utilize. The network, the members, actually is half politicians from governments, and we technical people is only a quarter of that. So most of the time, if you talk about the first slide that I had, AI is this decision theory thing, it just went through their head. So you have to learn a different way of talking to them, and that's quite exciting, very, very new to me. All right, so currently the work there is divided into 3 working groups. I am on the first group to think about how to define AI system, how to classify AI systems, and based on that to form a risk management framework. So that, remember the European AI Act is all about risk, and it is probably expected that many nations, many governments would actually follow the same framework. So it would be nice that we have a more engineering-friendly or more scientific-friendly way to define risk framework so that everyone can actually know that what to do. And then the classification framework comes out with a lot of processes you have to follow. So would it be nice that we have tools to help the developers to help the different actors in the AI system to comply with the risk or whatever. And there's accountability framework also is being studied there. And the third one is AI compute and climate. This is the area that I know least. It's co-chaired by IBM and NVIDIA, talking about server farm and how it is impact to climate, so on and so forth. All right, so let me briefly take you through what the AI classification working group has done, because in February, the first framework document was just published. So we actually have a way to actually classify what AI system is, how to classify AI system. And this is what the view of the documentation is depicting what the AI system is. So you compare this view to the first, our geeky textbook example way. It's not that far off, right? You still have an input, you have output, and you have AI model. The main difference is what we actually just hand wave as a utility function now is break into two parts. The economic context, and of course, in the center is people. So when that's what I meant, it's literally putting the human-centered values into the system. And what typically there is that you have to think about what kind of people involved in this picture, right? So who collects the data, who train the model, and who is using the output to make decision, or who is if it is an automatic system, who is monitoring this machine output to see if it is right? And in terms of economic context, are you using it in the credit scoring, or is just for information, or for some higher some activities that have higher consequences, like a credit scoring, right? Like the example I just gave. Are you using the AI system to help navigating a vehicle, or is it just for entertainment? Right? These are totally different things, even though the data, model, and output may be the same. Right? So these are the five different dimensions we actually the working group proposed to classify an AI system. So, and all these 5 elements has individual items that if this framework is adopted, basically the AI system developer, a model trainer, or deployer, which is using the output and carry out some task, or the designer have to actually answer. It's like a gigantic form. You have to say, are you just like going into the custom, you have to declare a lot of things. It's similar to that work. So the easiest way to understand it is going through example. This is the example flagged by the EU's AIA as high risk, super high risk. It's the credit scoring. So in terms of the users, the people-centric, you have to, if you are developing such a system, you will have to say, okay, the system is designed for ordinary people, like a bank employee, and it's impacting also the people applying for credits, and those are the bank customers. And it's actually kind of a heavy-handed because the credit seekers cannot opt out the system, right? So it has a lot of human rights impact. You have to demonstrate you understand this, right? So that's the center. And economic context, the sector is actually financial system. This is following the existing OECD classification in terms of economics, the world activities, like banking or insurance. This is not the, so in a way, it's actually critical. In many ways, critical. The data collection, how typically is collected from public, some proprietary data, like your credit cards, statements, your loan, so on and so forth. Or some, in many cases, it's actually public data, like if you have your house, unfortunately, is under foreclosure, or you have criminal records, things like those. And even there, you know, the EU has the right to be forgotten, so you have to actually make sure that you follow other related legal framework as well. And model building, is it rule-based system, or you train a simple linear regression system, which would be very easy to explain. But if you had the SVM, or you have, God forbid, deep learning system, you have to find a way to explain that how do you actually validate the system as suitable for deployment. And you as a system user, you have to actually be able to explain that. So on and so forth. And the other example is GPT-3, that's from OpenAI, is very trendy recently. In fact, this one, the open source version of the same technology has become a real business. The marketing material, for example, even you take their stock photos, you run into these are the real people, you have to get their consent, and so a lot of them just use the so-called generative system to create fake human. They look like human, but they are not real people. So in the marketing material, so in such a system, you have to understand that while again, who are the users, who are you impact, and what are the people involved in the design, in the model training, in the data collection, and in the economic context. So you have to, and here, the harder part is probably, a lot of time you don't know how people will use it. People can use it to create a deep fake and spread rumors during election time, but you need to know. You need to be able to anticipate these kind of risk. And so this framework was just published in February. It's quite new, and the idea there is we put it out there to solicit feedback, so we can actually refine and make it much better. Especially if you have your AI system that doesn't fit in this framework, it's a good time for you to actually join or make your voice heard to make the system actually make the framework work for your AI projects. And of course, this classification is just identify.
Quick question.
Yeah.
It seems like in the model, the only thing that is AI specific is the model, because input, output, and the economy is independent of AI.
The input can be so like some of the GPT-3 kind of like generative AI system, the training data is actually synthesized.
Oh, the input
Right.
include the training data.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Right.
Because I was expecting more inside the AI model.
Right.
That it seems like it's all around the model, but what is interesting is kind of the model. And what about the explanation of the model, the explanatory aspect of this? Because that's the hard problem, I think.
Totally. But I guess we are at the juncture that we developers, AI system developers, need to be able to think deeper and say, well, we cannot just treat it and think about how to explain to the people we impacted. Right. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why decision theory, there's a decision box, and this is the math.
Yeah, it's easy to say, but.
Right, it's easy to say,
Oh.
but because in a way, we are actually too successful.
Yeah.
Our outcome is actually impacting everyone, so we have the responsibility, right? Right, so the next step is actually, based on this classification, they would actually define how to define risks. And from there, hopefully they can actually form a lot of policy, government policy, and start the regulation and legislation work. All right, so thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to have a discussion or answer it to the best extent that I know.
Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the traditional first question is, how many of you are IEEE members? Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for this fascinating talk. So, how is the sort of the attitude among the different sort of major economies like U.S. versus EU, and of course China is a whole different world, right? So how do you kind of categorize their different attitude toward AI regulation?
That's a very interesting question, and this is what I learned through this past 2 years. EU is very government-driven, so they are very eager to regulate, like privacy and things like that, all right? United States is the opposite. Even though the White House OSTP is published under Biden Democratic administration, if you read the content, it's basically just saying that we actually run through all the existing laws, the federal laws. We find a lot of things are already addressed, especially in the Civil Rights Act, non-discrimination and equal protection and all that stuff. And so basically, it's actually a list of the related laws that say, well, I think United States is in a good place. And G20 and UN, these are just guidelines because UN has 193 countries. As you alluded, China is one extreme, and you have others is the other extreme. So they just have the guidelines referring back to the UN charters, the human rights, the fundamental human rights to property and pursuit of happiness and things like that. In G20, the same thing. So it's a wide spectrum. China is very different. So China thinks that I'm the government, so everything government is doing for the best of the people. So they don't think there will be an interesting debate, like the surveillance, the social credit, right? Every Chinese citizen is being computed with a social credit score by the government. And if your credit score is not good, you are prohibited from purchasing airline tickets, for example. And it's actually it's done by government, and government is regulated by people. And so what's wrong with that? That's their typical thinking. And of course, that is very contradictory to OECD's, majority of OECD members' point of view. Yes?
I don't know, sort of tangential question. Is this working? Tangential question, but it sounds like these organizations, they sort of have different, I'm guessing, you imply they have different goals in mind. So the US one sounds like it's kind of focused on trying to articulate that there are laws that already govern certain things, trying to bring some clarity on what's already covered. The OECD sounds like you covered that because that one's trying to be more prescriptive and actually have an impact on business. But you mentioned like the G20 is providing guidelines, and I don't know if there's others like that.
Mm-hmm.
What is their, like if they're providing guidelines, is there a specific goal that these organizations are probably trying to achieve?
Yeah, so G20 is actually a forum for 20 or so nations to talk about our world, right? We don't want to have wars, for example, and we want to foster economic development and cooperations. And they recognize from G7 to G20 already, the membership is more diverse. And so they recognize the members are all sovereign nations. They should have their say to how to actually have their legal system, how to structure the legal system and framework there. And so the best really they can do is guidelines. It's not like some international criminal body that can define war criminals and things like that. But a lot of these principles are very likely to surface up when you have international global trade. You have economic activities that cross the national boundaries, and so it will be would it be nice that we have a so-called rule-based systems that the both sides of the trading partners are abide by the same rules. And so these are actually the objective.
Yeah, and another question is about the armament and AI. What's the regulation? Is there anything on this that deals with either in the EU or in this organization that deals with armament and the application of AI and those armament?
You mean armament?
Armament in war. Right?
Oh.
So lethal weapons that have AI in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, yes. So that's actually very touchy subject, and and luckily I have not exposed to that because we are talking about in the economic context. The OECD is actually the E is actually for economic, so it's mostly about trade. And so, but as you know, that even in the United States, the big tech company have different cultural background towards the example that you just mentioned. The famous example is Google actually has the employee force the company to not having any contracts, AI-related contract with Department of Defense. Because they are not in the business of killing people, for example. Whereas Microsoft is taking a totally different approach. The company thinking around this is, when we have troops out there, we want to make sure our troops have the best. And so if we have the best AI system, by all means, we should help our troops to protect themselves. So even within the United States, just these two big companies, we are not having consensus, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, because I was. Sorry.
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting topic. Every time we go to these kind of meetings, you can actually debate this on and on. And it's very thought-provoking. They are all very thought-provoking debates.
Yeah, the reason for the question, well, maybe not the reason, but what I was expecting is something around, it should be a human being
In the loop.
that is directing the AI system,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
or could the AI system take this type of decision by itself, that type of thing.
That's right, and that's why they call human-centered value, right? So you can have an AI system that is assisting a human making the decision, and that's where the accountability lies. That human eventually decided that to take this action. That's where the accountability is. So one of the accountability frameworks is addressing that. Whereas if you submit a resume to a website and 5 seconds later you receive a rejection letter because the website is utilizing AI in a very fully automated way, then that's actually a totally different ball game, right? So current thinking is one would be classified as super high risk, the other is probably moderate risk. Right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed this. In that model, does that model kind of skirt, or maybe, I'm going to call it punt, does it kind of punt let's call it accountability of, knowing the data lineage, like the lineage to the test data, for example, by putting the people there. It almost sounds like, hey, it's really hard to manage, versions of input data and versions of models, right? Because that's all related to how it behaves. So we're just going to say if the human's in there and, there's a human element that offsets that, it doesn't really matter how you manage out any of that other stuff. I mean, I'm kind of drawing a really extreme point to try to get you to talk about that.
So I want to emphasize again that I'm only involved in one of the three working groups. So of course I talk about the thing that I know most.
Yeah.
There is actually a working group. They are thinking about accountability, right? So that's unfortunately I'm not exposed to that,
Okay.
but I'm sure they are going to come up with a very good explanation.
Okay. It just looks like the model allows for that hole, so I was kind of wondering,
But then again, there is something called policy framework. It's actually a guideline of how to think, for government, how to think to how you should approach, how to regulate, or you want to legislate. So it's actually a thinking piece, rather than a very, prescriptive approach. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, he's from Google.
You're from Google. You probably can share with us a lot of different opinions. And some of the model thing, just like we talked about, right? It's not. It's time. The consensus is time for us, the computer scientists and AI researchers, to think about our impact. Right? We cannot just relate it to equation. That equation does it, not me. That's no longer good enough.
So another question is that given the sort of the emphasis on putting human in the center, accountability, explainability, do you think self-driving car will ever become a reality?
There are actually a lot of self-driving vehicles already deployed in the world, especially in like the mass transportation, self-train, and I believe some metro system in European country. You don't see a driver, human driver on the vehicle. It's, and in fact, we actually have enjoyed self-driving airplane for a long time, right? You actually, after you reaching the cruising altitude, the pilots are actually doing nothing, right? And so again, Microsoft have a very different views than Google or others. We think a more realistic way to do this is control the environment first. Having vehicle to go on to do what a human is doing, to drive around the open streets, it's probably more difficult than many things. But if you if you actually can declare a certain highway system, like there was a proposal to have a self-driving vehicle only lanes between Seattle to Vancouver, Canada. Only the self-driving car can actually can actually get on that lane. That probably is a much easier problem to solve. So it depends on how do you want to approach it. If you want to say replace all the Uber drivers, especially given all the Uber drivers now have to be treated as employees, not as contractors. And having AI to replace a human, I don't know. Personally, I don't think it's it can be a realistic in anytime soon. But bus, mass transportation, that's more achievable. I don't know. What do you think? Are you working on
I'm not working on Waymo.
Oh, okay, yeah, I don't
But
know.
I think what you're saying, I don't drive a Tesla, but my son has a Tesla. And it kind of aligns with what you're saying, right? Because, self-driving mode, if you're on the highway, it's kind of like your, controlled lane, right? It does a great job, as long as you don't throw a tire in the middle of the road, probably. But, in the city streets, it's a lot
Right.
tougher. So.
And in those environments, you don't have, the safe distance is actually a few inches.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is just more efficient. So, I don't know. Why are we going to make our task more difficult than necessary by having the self-driving machine to emulate all the human capabilities?
Actually, do you know if, because I've seen pictures, it looks like China's approach to this might be more aligned to what you're saying. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I've seen I haven't read it and I haven't researched it, but you see those articles about, conversion of highways where they have certain lanes, and it feels like that's probably the direction they might be going. Do you have any knowledge of
I
what other
don't know
countries might be
about
doing, or?
those stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been to China for longest time, 2 years.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm definitely outdated.
Well, you quarantine for 10 days if you go there.
More questions? All right, well, thank you, Dr.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. I was wondering, this is the question that it have been bugging me for a while now, and is explanation. How do you explain? Because as you show the initial equation, so it's basically a neural network or any of these type of systems. You train them. How are you going to? And that's how are you going to make those systems explain what the answer is? I mean, you can come up with all the indices and whatever numerical values of everyone in the network, but how are we going to be able to explain what it's doing, to a layman?
right. In fact, this is actually fascinating to me, myself as well, while I was still actively working on them. And it kind of reminds me a approach in longest time in the literature is called analysis by resynthesis. So that's actually a principle. It's actually in our cell phone, right? You want to compress your audio, and the best way to compress your audio is actually train a synthesizer to see what would happen if you compress a certain way, and to what extent you can reconstruct the original signal, and you see what is making, what kind of a distortion and noises that it has created, and then you actually compensate for that. To some extent, the so-called GAN, generative adversarial network, is actually following that principle. They're thinking, right? I want to train a face recognizer or a image recognizer, and one way to apply the analysis by resynthesis idea is I train another synthesizer at the same time and artificially synthesize all sorts of raw exemplars and try to attack the system and see where it failed, right? And in the end, if everything works well, you can actually see that what is being trained as a synthesizer, the generator, the more modern term is the generator. What the generator is generating to understand how the recognition part is working, right? And so when you look at the synthesizer, that's why the synthesizer, the generative AI part nowadays, in many cases, they are generating amazing photo, amazing image, or producing a very fluent, very natural sounding text. And so there's actually a possibility that we can understand an analysis kind of a task like a recognizer by actually using the second equation, the generative modeling approach, rather than direct modeling approach. You are right. The direct modeling approach, you just have a brute force, input, output, and go. Find a curve to fit what you have seen, and we probably don't. And if it is a linear system, we know that's probably doing a lot of dimension, PCA or SVD kinds of stuff. But with all the nonlinearity inside, it's very hard to understand what is happening. But if you ask a system, why are you reaching to this conclusion by asking you to synthesize what do you think, what you have seen, that's probably a easier way out. So I have a test about it, but I just look at the success, the power, the generative modeling approach, and I think maybe that's actually a way that can help.
IBM did some enhancement of to analyze X-rays, and because they didn't have enough samples, they had a generator of samples, and the end result was really not usable at all. So I understand what you are going through, or what is and this could be an interesting solution if we have enough samples and we use the samples for both, but for generating samples using AI doesn't have found out well, at least
right.
on some of the experiments that I have seen.
That's why this is actually actively researched area.
Yeah.
So we still have a lot to do.
Yeah.
Our jobs will be taken over by AI. All right.
Any questions? Well, thank you, Dr. Wang.
Thank you.